None of it made any actual sense. And I said that in my remarks. And I truly do mean this, that I know that we were in the weeds here, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm happy to address it. But it's just like, I learned a lot of things. I never really paid much attention to board composition. I probably should have,
Yeah.
and that's my fault. But I think I'll be a more effective messenger, a more effective
Yeah.
leader. I learned more about human nature in
Yeah.
45 days than in all of my 18 years of doing this. So I view this as a very positive thing. I'll be more effective.
Hello and welcome to the Ann and Phelim Scoop. I'm Phelim McAleer, and we have a very, very special show for you this week. We're dedicating the whole show to James O'Keefe, formerly of Project Veritas, but now the Chief Executive Officer of OMG Media, O'Keefe Media Group. James, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you.
I want to start right at the very beginning when I first met you. And the reality is I can't remember when I first met you. But I do remember first hearing about you. There was this guy. We had a screening of our movie, Mind Your Own Business, at a screening room in the Pacific Palisades. John Voight was at the screening. And then there was this guy there, right? And he worked for this website called Drudge. And I remember him standing at our friend's fridge after the screening, telling me how he was going to set up a website. And the big thing he was thinking about, he was clear it had to be named after his name, because Drudge had done that, Huffington had done that. But lots of people were telling him not to call it after his name. And he did, and I'm glad he did, because that website was Breitbart. And the person I was talking to was a guy called Andrew Breitbart. And he was telling me about how this site was going to be revolutionary, but they were going to start off with a banger story. They were going, that they needed some banger stories. And I then remember being in Andrew's basement, I think, and I think his one employee there, Alex Marlowe, who's now the editor-in-chief, was there. But very shortly afterwards, your story arrived, the Acorn story. How long after Breitbart was up and running did your story run on the website?
It was, the story ran September 2009, so I don't know, some year after.
A year after, right.
Well, with biggovernment.com started, and then the Acorn story came immediately when that one started.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah.
Oh,
that was it. He was saying, each
big
website...
government, big this, big that.
Each website has to come, he said, with a bang, right? And funny, he approached us, myself and Anne, about being the heads of Big Environment. He says, I want to call it Big Climate. And I says, no, don't call it Big Climate, call it Big Environment. And he's going, okay. So, but it didn't work out. That we ended up doing our own thing. But so remind people about the Acorn story. What was it? And try and tell them how big it was.
That was almost 15 years ago.
Wow.
September 2009. This was a story, undercover tapes of people inside this group called Acorn, which was the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. And they were telling me how to evade tax laws and circumvent tax laws and declare the prostitution money, because I was pretending to be a pimp, and to disguise this on my income taxes. And this was a massive story. It was covered by the mainstream media. It led to congressional action to defund Acorn. And Jon Stewart covered it on The Daily Show. South Park covered it. It was a massive story, and it all happened in about a week's time.
That's right. Yeah. So Acorn, and they were heavily involved in Obama's election. They were right in there in the Democratic establishment. And I mean, you said a couple of interesting things there. It was covered by the mainstream media, and I think so many of your current issues are very. You can almost take what happened with Acorn and say, if only people understood what happened with Acorn. Andrew Breitbart had maybe, you guys had 4 or 5 different Acorn outlets telling you this. And some of them were worse than others. Some of them, I mean, I remember one of them you said, we're bringing in a couple of 14-year-olds.
Yes.
And rather than reporting you for sex trafficking, they told you that you could put them down as
dependents.
Dependent minors and get a tax deduction on them.
Yes.
But Andrew was clever, and Andrew understand, and I remember saying it's nothing. Him saying we have to get the mainstream media involved in these things. They have to cover it, and I think you've said that in the past too. And the drip of these stories was the killer. If you'd released them all at once, they could have killed the story in a day or two.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Don't fire all your ammunition at once. And he had said that, if we release these a little bit of time, they'll say that it's isolated. They fell into that trap.
Uh-huh.
CNN reported, well, this is just an isolated incident. Of course, there was no way for them to know
Yes.
that it was isolated, but they just jumped to that conclusion, showcasing the avarice, the collusion, and the just not checking your facts.
Yeah.
And they did this. And Andrew told me, do not pick up your phone. One time, the first day the story launched, someone called my iPhone. iPhones were brand new at that point. It was like they'd only been out a year. Someone called my iPhone 70 times, CNN producer, and I didn't pick up the phone. I couldn't actually make an outgoing call because the phone kept ringing. I couldn't actually type in.
Yeah.
And Andrew said they're going to try to personalize the story. They're going to make it about you personally, so don't pick up the phone. So I didn't, and they were unable to personalize the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, and the mainstream media, that was back when they were still pretending. And I remember my favorite part of that story was Acorn issued a statement. There was speculation that you had all these different places, you were in all these different outlets. And Acorn issued a statement saying, this did not happen. We know for a fact it didn't happen in Baltimore, Philadelphia, somewhere. And then you immediately dropped. Was it Philadelphia?
Yeah.
You immediately dropped
All
that
of them,
city.
Baltimore, Philadelphia.
You dropped that city, right? The New York Times ran a story where they went in and changed her quote to remove one of the cities.
That's right.
And that was my favorite bit of it because, when the journalist was asked about it, he said, well, I knew the head of Acorn wouldn't lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I changed the quote to reflect the truth.
I remember that. Most people don't remember that. That's very, very good. It was actually September 9th was Baltimore, and then the very next one we released, I'm trying to remember, it was D.C. It was Friday, September 11th. And I remember, so it was September 10th, September 11th. I remember Andrew was wondering, should we release this on September 11th? This was 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And then on Monday, we released New York. That was Brooklyn. And they told us to hide the money in a tin can in the ground, the pimp money. And I remember in New York, Hannah and I walked into this office, and there was a line of people to get in. And they were all waiting for their housing loans or what have you. But Hannah was dressed in,
Yes.
like ostensibly the most ridiculous, like Miami escort-looking thing.
Yeah.
This is not how prostitutes dress in Baltimore. But Hannah's this young woman, 20-year-old. I'm 25 at the time. And they see us, and I say, my girlfriend's a lady of the night. And they go, okay, why don't you come to the front of the line? So it's like we bypassed all these people waiting.
Yeah.
And they brought us in this room. And covering the walls of this room were just whiteboards of all these shenanigans. So my camera was embedded in a tie, and in order to record, I have to sort of like use my body. So I'm recording the wall and I'm making sure I'm getting all the whiteboard information. It turns out what was on the whiteboard were other illegal schemes and things, which all made the New York Post.
So a journalist, rather than phoning up Acorn and said, the Acorn CEO saying, you said this, but this is untrue. What do you say now? He said he changed her quote without her permission.
This is Bertha Lewis, the head of Acorn. He changed the quote because the New York tape, that one I just mentioned, showed them telling me how to disguise the profits, and it was so damning. The whole story was damning of the media. And Andrew Breitbart told me when I knocked on his door here in Westwood, California. Went to his home with the tapes before they launched, and he said, this is going to embarrass the New York Times. So he called it, and I said, what do you mean New York Times? I didn't fully understand where he was going. But he was right. And eventually the Clark Hoyt, then ombudsman, there's no longer an ombudsman.
That's right.
Clark Hoyt, Pulitzer Prize-winning ombudsman for New York Times, wrote a piece saying, I think it was called Tuning In Too Late.
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember this, but he apologized. He said, we went through the raw tapes, because everyone said I doctored the tapes, and the most damning quotes matched the audio and were not out of context.
Yes.
This is a New York Times Pulitzer Prize.
And then, do you remember the New York Times said, because, coming in too late, that's another thing. They ignored it for days. They wouldn't cover it, and then they covered it in page 2,
they
or
covered
page
it,
25.
So, no, it was actually the Congress defunded Acorn before the New York Times assigned a reporter to the story.
Wow.
It was so insane that I think another columnist for You're bringing back all the memories now.
Yeah.
Anecdotal memory. The Washington Examiner wrote, "It was truly an extraordinary series of events for Congress to take action before the New York Times thinks it's newsworthy." It was so damning.
Yes.
And the fact that it was two kids from the cast of High School Musical 3
Yes.
with the grandmother's chinchilla coat as the pimp costume.
Yes.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. It is crazy. But I mean, Andrew Breitbart was was so smart and knew how the media worked. And I think if Andrew Breitbart had been on the board of Project Veritas, you wouldn't be launching OMG Media. But we'll come to that in a minute. And do you remember also the New York Times then said, we're going to appoint a specialist reporter to who's going to be sort of scouring the right-wing blogs and the right-wing and Breitbart, basically, and other places to find the stories we're too slow to get.
Yeah.
But we're not going to tell you who it is. Right. Because he's going to be bombarded with people pitching stories to him. To me, that was the perfect example of just how out of touch. By the way, not just the left wing media, but the mainstream media. I always say you can tell how interested in how good a news organization is if you go on their website and try and get in touch with a reporter.
Interesting. That's an interesting, astute.
Go on the New York Times now. Pick a reporter and go on the New York Times now and try and find their email address.
Interesting.
Try and find a phone number for them. Try and find a phone number for the New York Times news desk. Like my background is journalism, the British journalism system. Even though I worked in Northern Ireland and the South, but it all comes from that British Fleet Street tradition, and. Okay, we're cool and we're smart and we're out there. We've got sources everywhere. But a huge number of stories come into you. You pick up, you're sitting there at your desk and literally someone will come in with a story that'll get you the front page the next day.
Right.
People who like your publication, people you've met in other stories, people who just go, what's the local paper? And they just blab it to you. They might have get offered to someone else and they turned it down. But so many stories come in. And the New York Times, you cannot cold call the New York Times. So you have to be in the inn.
It's very, very astute observation. Accessibility for me is huge. Even on my Instagram, I get thousands of DMs even as I sit here right now, and I it's very difficult to respond to them all. But I think to the extent that you can, you're a better journalist. And it's very interesting accessibility.
Yes.
And I think that training my team to respond to as many of them as possible, and you're sort of triage. It's almost like the ER room. You're trying to figure out which of these is going to be the most interesting tip.
Yes.
But it's a very important point.
Yeah. And do you remember, we're going all over the place, but it wasn't one of your first. So you had a model with Project Veritas of going undercover. Then you realized we can get the whistleblowers as well.
Yeah.
Right. And was it the Google whistleblower? You were giving a speech at CPAC and you put your email address up there or something like that. And was it the Google whistleblower? Yeah. So it was accessibility again.
Accessibility. Google. Well, eventually it's like you're trying to infiltrate. You're trying to get on the inside of these places. But going back to the New York Times example, a lot of these New York Times reporters, not only you can't get in touch with them. I mean, they are literally putting blinders on. They don't want to see anything.
Yes.
And they're in cahoots with their sources in the government.
Yes.
So that these whistleblowers, they can't go to the New York Times. In fact, someone once said famously, if the Google guy went to the New York Times, they would burn him intentionally, like a trophy buck on the wall.
Yeah.
So initially at Project Veritas, I would try to get inside these places. It was very difficult to do that responsibly, legally, and ethically. So the better option is for people on the inside to come to you. And that's what started to happen about maybe 3 to 5 years ago. And it was the most famous example of this was an ABC News insider came to me with the Amy Robach, Jeff Epstein tape where this person recorded the Good Morning America anchor on a commercial break with the lav mic on her lapel or whatever, not lapel, but dress. And she was upset that Disney spiked the Epstein story. This was recorded and sent to me. I could have never gotten that through infiltration.
By the way, can I just interrupt you? Like, what if that person couldn't find your email address? What if that person couldn't find
exactly? Yeah.
And by the way, people don't like sending things to info@Project Veritas.
No.
They like, it's funny, you get more, if it's James O'Keefe at gmail.com or whatever it is, they will send it. So sorry to interrupt you, but go ahead.
No, it's a very astute observation, very rarely made by anybody. And for me, there's a burden that comes with being accessible, because you do have to sift through 95, 99% of the stuff is just bunk. It's just not interesting. But that's the price you have to pay.
Yeah.
And even being a public figure, I make myself, I'll give you an example. The other day, Signal, someone just cold called me. Now you get these calls and it's very frustrating. You get angry, you lose your temper. It's like, I don't want to deal with this crap. But you never know who could be on the other line. Mm-hmm. So you try to be polite. You try to be courteous. Because some people just want to talk your ear off.
Yeah.
They say, I'm sorry, ma'am, I really have to go.
Yeah.
But then this person calls me up on Signal randomly, and I pick up the phone. I actually picked up the phone, and I listened for a couple minutes, and they go, by the way, I work for Pfizer.
Yeah.
I said, what? I said, hold my calls.
Yes.
And they say, hey, give me one of those hidden cameras. I said, why? And this person, I can't tell you what they said, but they said, well, I'm seeing some things, I want to record it. This happened last week.
Yeah.
So it's a very astute observation, and you need a team of people to answer the phones.
Yes.
Much like the Boston Globe and the Spotlight.
It's called a newsroom, right? And this is, I've worked for a lot of newspapers, and I remember just a conversation. I'd worked for the Irish News maybe for 8 or 9 years. Like, I worked for the Irish News during the Troubles, right? The phones were hopping, right? And the news was often dramatic, and then there was news about the news. But I remember speaking to a young lady who just started working for our rival newspaper, the Belfast Telegraph. And she was telling me when she first started working in the Belfast Telegraph, she couldn't believe the noise, right? Because there was phones ringing all the time.
What time frame was this? What decade?
This would have been late 90s.
90s, yeah.
Yeah. Phones ringing all the time. People doing things. People talking, right? People trying to work out. Because when you get a story, there's so many questions to be asked and so many ethics to be juggled with, and how's the best to approach it, and when do you approach the person, what's the right thing to do, and all this. But she said, like, at the start, she felt she wasn't going to be able to survive because the newsroom was so noisy.
Yes, this is a sign of success.
Yes.
This is good. And most people don't, I don't know if it's as changing times or the new generation that we live in, or work ethic, because even the 90s is a different era, isn't it?
Yes.
It's now 2023. This is 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And most people in their Zoomers, Generation Z, entitlement generation, Americans are working less hard.
Yeah.
It's just difficult to create a culture. I mean, to find the right people to do it, you have to be totally fearless. And I actually wrote a book called American Muckraker. I got a PDF of it here. There's a chapter called Character. And I list out the qualities it takes for someone to do this. You have to be indefatigable. You can never be fatigued.
Yes.
I think you're like this.
Yes.
You're always chasing the next thing.
Yes.
And you never stop. You have to be incorruptible. Mm-hmm. So if someone comes to me and say, hey, O'Keefe, here's $50 million so you don't publish the Pfizer story. Mm-hmm. Would I take the bribe? No. But advertising, it can sometimes corrupt an organization. Like, brought to you by Pfizer.
Yeah.
So I never took advertising money. That's not to be critical of people who do.
No, and I would sometimes, I mean, as a journalist, I never even knew who was advertising for their newspaper.
There was a firewall.
And almost this is different times. There was a trophy to be won if you attacked one of your advertisers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was like, it's great to put in the article. Is a significant advertiser with this outlet, but I'm not sure how the business people felt about it. But go ahead.
Well, these things have changed. Maybe you have to be absolutely fearless, and this is a quality that rarely exists. I don't know what it was like in Ireland, but I feel most people are very afraid in this country, or they're afraid to admit it. A lot of Christians are very afraid.
Yes.
So you have to be fearless, but you also have to have high integrity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you take a Venn diagram of all the people who are unafraid, and then you take a Venn diagram of all the people who have integrity, you have this very narrow sliver of people.
They do exist, though. They do. I can tell you that because I recently was hiring someone, and I recently interviewed a number of people for it, and I would put all of them in that Venn diagram. Interestingly
Is that
enough.
right?
Yes, they do exist. Right.
Rare.
Rare.
Few.
No. And funny, I was actually but I got good recommendations from a couple of people, right? But I was surprised, right? Because I know, like you got to the stage now where people don't like to travel.
Yes, that's true. I see that everywhere.
You see that? It's like young people going, and I'm going, and I was during the interview process. I was going like, so we made a movie in Serbia. How would you feel about it? I said we have to go to Serbia for a week or a month.
Yeah.
Right. And a number of people went, oh yeah. I was going, okay, this is something, but I know that there are other people too who go, well, I have a dog, I have a cat, I have.
I get that a lot, and people don't want to go. I'm from the New York, New Jersey area, which most people don't like. I'm from there. Most people in the Midwest or Southwest or Southeast, or they don't want to go travel to New York and this and that. I almost view it as like a badge of a way of weeding people out. You have to be willing to make sacrifices. And I've been fortunate. I don't have a family, not yet. Hopefully, I will soon. And most people with families, it's difficult for them.
No, listen,
rightfully so,
when we were young, when I was in the Irish News and all that, like none of us had families, right? None of us, and I do understand that and families is different too. Fathers used to be able to just, ignore their kids and
work all the time
and see you when you're 16, or 18, go off to college. But that's not how families are organized now. Fathers are expected to be at the games and at the events. And I'm not saying that the old way was the best way, the good old days, but I'm just saying that's different now. But for people, for young journalists starting out, it's travel is an opportunity, should be an opportunity, not a curse.
Yes.
But anyway, this probably
But
sounds.
You have all those qualities. You also have to be skeptical.
Yes.
As a journalist,
Yes.
has to be skeptical. So you have to be a good discerning.
Yes.
So think of all these qualities: fearless,
Mm-hmm.
integrity, incorruptible, discerning, skeptical, and without partiality. So without fear or favor. So you're impartial. Now, there are very few people that have all these qualities. It's not an easy thing to find. You found a few of them.
Yes, I did.
But if you grow too quickly, if you end up getting people on your team who do not have these qualities.
Totally. And I suppose I was going to talk about what you've done since Andrew, but that kind of brings us on to what you've had an amazing career. You've brought down more people. You've brought down NPR. The heads of NPR, you've brought down. Who else? Give us your greatest.
I feel
hits.
like I've done a story on everything.
Yes.
But, the media is a big beat, exposing CNN, New York Times.
Yes. New York Times.
Recording New York Times reporters saying one thing in public, another in private.
Yeah.
Voter fraud, where people were harvesting ballots in Texas. Raquel Rodriguez was
and
arrested. Minnesota, Somali men bragging about all the ballots in their lap. Literally, you can see the ballots, which is a misdemeanor in Minnesota. I've sued people for defamation. I've won every lawsuit that's been waged against me. I've been raided by the FBI. I've been arrested in Louisiana.
Yeah.
I've exposed tech companies, Twitter executives talking about shadow banning.
When they were denying it to Congress.
They were denying it to Congress. Chased a Twitter executive through the streets of New York City right before Elon Musk took over the company. Most recently, a story on Pfizer executive talking about the mutations of the virus, and they were doing things that they didn't want the public to know about. I've probably done hundreds of investigations over the last 10 years, and about a story a week is what was sort of like 60 minutes for citizen journalism.
We've always talked about it. So I'm a great fan of what you do because I understand what you do, because you're actually your title of your book was Muckraker. You're an old-fashioned British muckraking journalist. You're a Fleet Street. You literally should have the hat with the press thing here and a grubby Mac.
The difference
on you.
is everything I report, which is even more difficult, is I try to get it on video. So I don't report anything unless I can see it, which is a difficult standard.
Very, very difficult standard.
I can't report the words unless you can hear it or you can see it. Sometimes you got to see lips moving to see it, and it's very difficult and incredibly expensive.
Yes.
That's the one thing about investigative reporting. It's very expensive. And I ran a nonprofit for 13 years, and the thing about nonprofit, I guess if you're the owner of a for-profit, you can do this too, is that it's a loss leader on the company's balance sheet. So in other words, I'll spend $1 million to do a story where many executives would say, well, I'm not going to spend that money. I'll pocket that money or put it as dividends to the shareholders or give your people a pay increase. For me, as the chairman and CEO of Veritas, I would always say, oh, we're going to spend this money on this story, which is a very unique perspective. Most people are unwilling to spend that much money. If anything, in the online media world, you put out 5 stories a day.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all a bunch of regurgitated crap.
It's called journalism.
No.
It's called journalism. And it's now funny, journalism is soul destroying, but I tell you, it trains you to write a story. Is one thing, but it's very soul destroying. Funny, I was just looking at the notes I made there when you're speaking. Remember, Andrew Breitbart gave out his mobile number. Do you remember that?
I do.
Andrew Breitbart gave out his mobile number to everyone, and the torture he must have got back then, phone calls from people. But again, he was accessible, and
That's a very important and astute observation that you're making that most people don't understand. I don't do it as much as Andrew did, but I do give out my number to everybody because you never know what someone might have on the other line. But it's also very difficult to be a public figure. And Andrew died when he was 43.
42, 43,
And I don't want that to happen to me. I'm 38.
Yeah, funny. I didn't. I was going to say, and I was going to say maybe it speeded up his demise. Now he had a genetic heart condition. Right. He wouldn't have known about it because he was adopted.
Right.
That the genetic aspect. Maybe his parents died young as well. I don't want to speculate because his widow and his family are out there, and that is why American mainstream media, and I just don't mean the left wing media. It's just so boring and so it's boring. It's so self-righteous.
Yeah.
They talk about a bubble, but they're actually in a literal bubble, right? And by the way, sometimes I get access to a story that I'm not interested in, but actually somebody in the New York Times would be interested in. And could I get in touch with them? Could you actually find them, or even to try? I did a play in New York, Gosnell story.
I saw where the FBI Lovebirds one. I don't know which was the play that I witnessed.
No, it was FBI Lovebirds.
FBI Lovebirds,
yeah. But no, we did another one about abortion, actually. It was some left-wing comedian was doing, oh God, a comedy about abortion, and I did, oh Gosnell, the truth about abortion, right, at the same time. And can you find the address of the critics from the New York Times to get them to comment? The arts reporter, the culture reporter? No. Right? And the only way is if they ever write a story about you and phone you up for a comment, then you've got
even a step further for your audience, the New York Times, when they reached out to you for comment, they don't actually want to talk to you on the telephone. They avoid, when you want to have a conversation like we're having, you talk to people. They want to avoid conversation. Yes. They want to avoid interaction. It has to be, please respond to this email, and then they can chop it up and splice and dice the quotes. We all know they do that. But Adam Goldman at the New York Times, national security reporter, they're like obsessed with me. They write monthly front page pieces, and this comedian did a story about how they write about me, and it sounds like you have to take the newspaper and twist it to understand what they're actually trying to say, because the way they write these things, they can't describe reality as it is.
Exactly.
They have to write it in this mendacious, twisted way where you're not even sure what they're actually saying.
That's right.
In order to paint the Picasso portrait of you that they need to paint.
That's right.
So they can't talk to you because if they were to record me right now, right, and they were to put out their audience, they're like, oh, well, seems like a rational guy. Seems like a sensible person.
Yeah.
But they don't want you to look sensible. So they have to write about you with all this sophistry and innuendo where they make it. And the problem with what they do is that most people are actually, I feel, are waking up to it, because you live in the era of Instagram, you live in the era of Twitter, Elon Musk taking over Twitter, where people now can actually see the raw information for themselves. We live in the age of video. And the New York Times doesn't like video, because if you were to video record this interaction between you and I, they'd lose the narrative. They have to write about it. So when my interactions with the national security reporters, New York Times, they never want to actually talk to me on the phone. They actually hang up the phone when I call them.
Yes.
So it's like
that's an example. So let me get this straight. A journalist from the New York Times, they hang up the phone when James O'Keefe calls them, right?
Always.
So they don't know what you're calling about, but they hang up the phone. Tell me in what newsroom that should happen. You should be fired for that, but instead they get medals for it. This is journalism. This is bad journalism. I mean, funny. I have a friend in Ireland, John Waters, who doesn't do mainstream media interviews, and he says, I was going, why not? And he says, I have another friend. He says, I explained to him what it is. He says, you have to look upon it as they have the drama already. They have the script already written, the drama already written.
Right.
You're a character in it.
That's true.
And they have your script already written. Mm-hmm. That's why they're asking you these questions. And if you come in with something that disturbs their drama, they have to rewrite the drama, and they won't do that.
Yes.
They won't have to rewrite the play, the narrative. So that's why they don't want to be in touch with you.
There was a story the New York Times did about, this was after the FBI raid, I'm trying to find it, where they wrote this headline, and here it is. This is the front page, New York Times, November 12th, 2021. This is after the FBI raid. Somehow the New York Times got a copy of my attorney-client memos. Gee, I wonder how they got those. Yeah. In any event, this is the headline, quote, documents show how the conservative group worked with lawyers to gauge how far its deceptive reporting practices could go before running afoul of federal laws. Well, gee, that's a very twisted way to say we make sure we work with lawyers to make sure everything we do is legal.
Yes.
But do you see how they wrote it?
Yes. So in other words, you're really being really careful to make sure you're not breaking the law.
Documents show how the conservative group worked with lawyers to gauge how far its deceptive reporting practices could go before running afoul of federal laws. Gee, it sounds like you're doing something wrong. No. Everything we did was legal.
Yes.
But why don't they just write everything they did? They work with lawyers to make sure they don't break the law.
And how much did you spend on those lawyers? I mean, but also this is what newsrooms do all day, every day. They work with lawyers to make sure that what they're doing is legal. And by the way, you know what? The reality is the New York Times does that once every 5 years because they so rarely go against the narrative or go against, and journalists now are very, very protected in spilling government secrets, unless you're Julian Assange, by the way. Then you
they work in cahoots with, in tandem with, like the New York Times national security reporters Mark Mazzetti and Adam Goldman. They're basically feds. They are feds, and I actually joke with them when I confront them. I say, "Do you secretly wish you were a fed?"
Yeah.
Because if you're a journalist, you're often. I grant you that you sometimes have to protect your sources in the government.
Now, there's nothing wrong with using anonymous sources as such.
If the question is who is manipulating who,
yes,
is the Fed manipulating the journalist?
Yes.
And that's because in journalism there's a tension between what I call access and autonomy.
Yes.
You have to have access to people in the FBI, but you also have to be autonomous enough to tell the truth.
That's right.
And the people in the administrative state, deep state, as Trump calls it, or whatever you want to call it, the agencies are manipulating the journalists and feeding them this stuff and say, hey, run this.
Yes.
Well, what you're being given is propaganda.
Yes. Now, what you're being given could be propaganda or it could be the truth, but you have to check it. And you have to also ascribe it to, I mean, this thing of anonymous sources that has exploded. As you say, you never use anonymous sources.
No, I don't.
Never.
No.
Now, there's nothing wrong with using anonymous sources, but you have to.
It can't be the only thing that you use. You have to use it sparingly. Because if you use it 100% or 85% of the time, as the New York Times or Washington Post does, you're asking the audience to believe you by virtue of the decree that you're believable. You're saying, believe me because I told you so.
But also you have to ascribe the motive to the anonymous source. They don't do this, right? And nobody does this. But, sources within the Trump administration. Now, that could be some disgruntled person who's actually an anti-Trumper within the Biden and within the Trump could be.
And if you're right, if you're relaying information secondhand, the motive becomes more important. If you're showing the information firsthand,
yes.
If it's a videotape of Amy Robach talking about Jeff Epstein, then the motive, in my opinion, becomes less important because you're able to see the information for yourself. The New York Times did a story on the Trump tax returns in 2020. They didn't release any documents. They didn't show you any sources. They asked you to believe them because of people familiar with the matter. And there's a journalism professor named Jay Rosen. He said every time you use anonymous source, you're withdrawing from your ATM of credibility. And you sometimes have to make deposits. You can't only withdraw. Please believe me. It's like me saying, so there's this group called Acorn, and they disguise prostitution money. What's your proof, O'Keefe? You have to believe me because I'm a believable guy.
Yes.
People would laugh me out of the room.
Yeah.
They would laugh me. Even Andrew Breitbart said in 2009, I don't quite believe you unless I see the video.
Yeah.
So I brought the proof. And this is really the problem in journalism, the abuse of anonymous sources.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with using them sparingly.
I agree. But maybe there's a reason they don't reveal the sources because those sources don't exist.
Or they don't exist. And every time every time you see what their sources say, it never matches up with what they write.
Well, this is possibly inside baseball, but they did a big fracking expose at the New York Times once where they attributed industry insiders said this. They got all these emails. Industry insiders did this, industry, and they quoted these emails. Of course, the industry went, hold on, and did a search, and it turned out the senior industry insider was an intern. Right?
Yes, I've seen that before. I've seen examples where are they sock puppets in the back of the vehicle? Who are they interviewing?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing they say they selectively edit. So James O'Keefe selectively edits, right? As you've heard this before. Edit. Well, this is a bit of projection.
Yeah.
They accuse you of that which they are guilty of. And I got into this business thinking, what do you mean edit? And I say, show me the edit. Like, where's the edit? Right. And then I release the raw. But the problem with releasing the raw is then they say, well, how do I know there isn't some other material you haven't released? Yeah. And it becomes this sort of tautology where there's nothing I can do to satisfy them. In fact, I release the raw from the moment I walk in to the moment I walk out. And then they go, how do you know that after he walked out, he didn't return the recording device back on and walk back in again?
Right, yeah.
I can't win.
No, you can't win. And this arose when I started doing verbatim theatre here. So the first one we did was Ferguson. Grand jury testimony, 30 or 40 witnesses. And I broke it down to this play, an hour and a half of the most dramatic moments of the end of Michael Brown's life and the end of the cop's life as a public citizen or as a private citizen. And I had these reporters, nine of the acting crew walked out. 9 of the actors walked out during rehearsals because they couldn't handle the truth. I was giving voice to African Americans, but it wasn't. There was no hands up, don't shoot nonsense. It was all Michael Brown beating the crap out of a immigrant shopkeeper, punching this guy, punching that guy, hitting a cop, and then charging a cop. And it was all African Americans saying, in fact, the best evidence was this woman with a black nationalist tattoo on her arm who spent 3 months avoiding the subpoena and then was caught and then came and decided to tell the truth. It was stunning testimony. And these reporters were phoning up saying, it's verbatim. Every word in it is a word from a witness to this shooting or from a report or from a testimony. And they were going, yeah, but you edited it. And I'm going, yeah, I've edited this down to 1 hour, 45 minutes of only voice. You're editing this story down to 500 words. Mm-hmm. 100 of which will be my quote, 200 of which will be the other actors who walk out quote, and another couple of hundred will be your quotes. If I can't make a verbatim play, then you can't write this article.
It's all projection. They do the thing they're accusing you of, and it took me years to understand how they work. It's very effective technique to accuse your enemy of that which you're guilty of because it puts you on the immediate defensive. Yes. Now you have to justify yourself. But I learned in the business, maybe a few years ago, that I said everyone edits. You edit. In fact, CNN edits. The television stations edit, and they edit to a degree far more severe than we do.
Yes.
Because they have to edit for time.
Exactly.
And on the internet, my pieces usually my long form pieces are between 10 and 20 minutes.
Yes.
Which is far more than you see on Good Morning America.
Absolutely. I mean, this was the point I was making these guys. Sorry, like you're editing. You're going to be editing this down to a 600-word piece, an 800-word piece, maybe a 1,000-word piece. But you're writing an article criticizing me for editing a verbatim play. If I'm not allowed to put out a verbatim play, then you're not allowed to write this article because you're 10 times bigger editor than I am. I suppose that brings us forward then to Project Veritas, riding high, and by the way, we talked about it earlier. The problems of growth, the problems of hiring today. Project Veritas became a massive organization, 60 people, I believe.
Yep.
But, we've all worked in newsrooms with 60 people. or journalists have, and then there was a very public falling out with your board or dramatic ending to that. Tell me, okay, I'll sum it up for people that the board suspended you. Did they?
Yeah, what they called terminated me, but they initially removed me from my authority on February 6th. There was a board meeting. It was a 6-hour-long board meeting where they removed me from my ability to make decisions. They made the executive director and the chief financial officer report to the board as opposed to me. So I didn't have any hire or fire authority.
Yeah.
No spending authority. They cut off my access to credit card and told me to take vacation for 2 weeks. When I was on the vacation for 2 weeks, the mandated PTO, then on February 10th, during my vacation, they stripped me of all my authority and effectively terminated me from the company. And then on February 15th, they said, "Oh, James is just on vacation." On February 16th, I sent the board a letter and I said, "This has become a circus. This is I felt like I was Clarence Thomas in the hearing, saying this has become a disgrace, a circus. There's been defamation out there saying I violated bylaws and all types of stuff." I said, "Here's my proposal. By Monday, when you've asked me to return, I'm not sure what my job is, what I'm returning to." I said, "By Monday, you all need to resign." So I said, "You all need to resign." And then Monday, February 20th came, and they were not resigned. So I collected my personal documents from my desk, and I gave remarks, and that was to 60 people.
Yeah.
I knew that in addressing 60 people, it would likely leak.
Yeah.
I was always proud of the institution, Project Veritas. Nothing really ever leaked. But when this happened, the dynamics completely changed. Everything was leaking all the time.
Yes.
Because in these sorts of when you remove your heart and your soul and your founder from something, I think it was difficult. So they filmed a 45-minute address where I said my truth, and then and someone sent it somewhere, and it made its way around the internet.
I mean, we should probably tell people what a board is of a charity.
A board?
Yes. I mean, in the sense, people think a board, it's different from the board of a company, right?
Yeah.
Because they have, well, I suppose a board of a company has a fiduciary duty as well.
So 501c3s, also known as charities in the United States, are required by the IRS to have a board of directors. So what does that mean? It means that they have the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. So, for example, you have to have a quarterly board meeting or annual board. We had quarterly. You have to have an annual audit. That means every year they look at your books independently. You have to have quarterly financial statements. And the board has to set my compensation. So I don't set my own compensation. So the board members are taking look at the law requires. Now, some states require only one board member. I had 3 board members.
Oh, you had 3, yeah.
And
did you appoint them?
I did years ago.
Yeah.
And I never really focused on my board because
Why
I
would
ran
you?
the company like any company would. I took responsibility for everything. I was the chairman and CEO. Most people don't realize that I was. I mean, it was an unusual position because I was the talent.
Yes.
I was the chief fundraiser and I was the chief executive officer.
Yes.
Usually,
some of that would have been taken off you.
Shane Smith, who did Vice, he was also the talent and the face. It's very unusual to have your talent be your management. But I, in my life, knew instinctively at a very young age that the only way that I was going to be able to pull off this, that I could have the ability to do it, was if I was in charge of making the decisions. If somebody else above me was making the decisions, well, shit, I could never spend $1 million on a story. They would never let me do that.
No newsroom in its right mind would allow anyone to spend $1 million on a story.
So when I started in my dad's garage in 2010, I quickly learned, well, in order to do this story, I have to get the lawyer. In order to get the lawyer, I have to raise the money. In order to raise the money, I have to... So it became this thing, okay, now I need to create a company. Oh, the company needs a board. So I put people on the board that I thought I could trust. Now I can't tell you how many times you go, but you appointed the board.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, you don't have to be an expert in Shakespeare to know that some people that you think you can trust, you learn that you can't.
Yes.
And that's life. And frankly, you can count on one hand the people that are your friends in this life. you can also you learn by going through crazy things who people really are.
Yes.
And when you start out, it's different than when you are
Up there. Yeah.
a $25 million
Yes.
company
Yes.
with 70 employees.
Yes.
And you're going after the FBI, Pfizer, Google, Twitter, and Facebook.
And they're coming after you.
It's totally different
Yes.
than when you're in your dad's garage and you are broke.
Yes.
And I say in my departing remarks, February 20th, that the line that separates good and evil runs through every human heart. And
Yes.
there's a line in the sand that gets drawn. The deeper you go, the farther you go down the looking glass, the farther you go down the rabbit hole, you see who people really are.
Yeah.
Now, after this happened to me, there's a lot of horrible things that happen. We can talk about it if you want. But what I like to draw from these experiences is so much good.
Mm-hmm.
When I started my new company, OMG, it was a startup.
Yes.
It sort of still is, but the last few weeks, I had people volunteering. I had people on the floor eating pizza. I had people putting on their credit cards the flights for whistleblowers. They didn't want anything.
Yeah.
They believed in it. So I drew from this a lot of goodness that come out of a really bad situation.
Look, there's so much to talk about.
I know.
Were anyone in your board, were any of them journalists?
Well, I like to think of that word as a pretty expansive word.
Yes.
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 And I don't like to be
True,
restrictive
true.
on labels,
Yes.
but it's a tough thing to say, and there's a lot, frankly, that I'm not prepared to say because there's a lot of unknowns.
Well, okay, I'll say what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I only know one member of your board, Matt Termont. In fact, Matt's been on the show in the past, I believe. Yeah, and think if they'd known more how the nuts and bolts of journalism works, this wouldn't have happened. I don't think they knew what Project Veritas was. Bizarrely, they thought they were on the board of Heritage or some other institutional 501c3. I mean, as you say, you were the board, you were the CEO, you were the talent, you were the chief fundraiser. You could take the decision to spend $1 million on a project. And maybe that project wouldn't work out, but you alone could take that decision. And that's a very unusual situation to be in. But you were the editor, you were the chief of this organization, and that was your role. And you were the one that took the arrows for that as well, don't forget.
Yeah, it was you have to understand, let me help answer this. It was a very philanthropic endeavor in this respect. I often had to pack 5 meetings in a day.
Mm-hmm.
There's no incentive for me to work as hard as I was financially. It was a passion project.
Yes.
And I was responsible for raising more than half the revenue. So you think $25 million. I mean, if I don't do anything, the company goes down in revenue by 50%, just by virtue of the fact that I'm meeting with people, I'm asking them for money.
Yeah.
It's a charity.
Yep.
So the money doesn't come in unless I ask for it every single year. So I'm working 90 hours a week on the road, and I want to go to bed. But rather than that, I'm going to go out to dinner with this guy and ask him for $10,000.
Yes.
That money doesn't come to me.
No.
It goes to the charity so that I can pay all these people's salaries. Yeah. And I was working so hard, it got to the point where, it probably was ultimately unsustainable, but it was a philanthropic thing.
Yeah.
And the board, you have to have a board of directors. I never focused on who or how the board, because I'm not a political guy.
Exactly.
I never focused on
maybe
the
you should have been.
Maybe I should have been, but if I was that way, there'd never be a Project Veritas.
That's true. I mean, look, a number of things struck me about their initial speech or their initial statement, or what came out was that that you were spending so much money on black cars.
Yeah, that was silly. That was ridiculous.
But that to me, I was going. If someone had come to me and said James O'Keefe has 24-hour security, right?
And Mike Huckabee said to me right after 5 Story, he says, "I'm the crazy thing about you, James, is that you're still alive." I mean, there was a lot of things there internally where people would say, "I'm worried for your well-being." Now, I'm in the vehicles talking about really and I'm a pretty transparent person, but I can't tell you the names of my sources, like for Epstein.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want me to get into an Uber X?
Yes.
And hey, Jones, how's it going there in Arkansas?
Yeah.
So that the Uber X who's recording, this is so preposterous.
But also, it's like it's so so 2008 or 2008. Look, like I mean, James O'Keefe in a black car, getting moved from meeting to meeting. 99% of donors, I think, would not have thought that that's a waste of resources. In fact, you're almost under-resourced, for lack of bodyguards. But 99% of donors would have thought that was a perfectly adequate use of resources.
I was packing a lot of meetings into the day, and I mean, I'm not exaggerating. It was actually, some remarked on my schedule. I said, how are you doing? How are you in 7 states in 1 week, to the point of exhaustion?
Yeah.
And I did probably took 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 Ubers a day.
Yes.
But it got to the point where I needed a driver.
Yes.
And this was more expensive, but I also needed security.
That's
and
right.
security was a couple thousand a day. It got to the point where with the IRS, it was like, well, does James pay for his own security? My compensation wasn't high enough. We were working so hard, raising so much money to pay all these people. And by the way, we were breaking even. It's not like we were earning revenue.
Yeah.
We were spending $20-odd million a year to operate.
Yes.
So it just got to the point where there's a great article by Dr. Malone, and it said the institutional pathology that led to James being removed from Project Veritas. I recommend reading it because it was a very bizarre confluence of events where people wanted my attention, they wanted my time. I'm the face of the company. I'm raising all the money. And it led to, some are calling it ego or resentment or jealousy or whatever you want to call it. Some think there's a conspiracy. Maybe there is. I don't have any direct evidence of that, just circumstantial. The timing of it was quite bizarre, that it was a week after the Pfizer story.
Yeah.
Because I've been the same guy for 13 years. If anything, I'm probably a better boss than I used to be.
Yeah, possibly, but you run a different organization, and we talked about that earlier, growth. I remember when I stopped working for a corporation or a business, I was working for myself and setting up a little business, etc. And I remember speaking to entrepreneurs who I didn't really know before I started on this path. And I remember one entrepreneur telling me, look, when you run a company, 1 in 10 people in your company is not going to like you, and 1 in 20 is going to want to destroy you. And, you employed 60, 70 people. And the idea that out of 60 or 70 people, that 10 or so don't like you or, think you're wrong, that's not surprising. That's to be expected.
It was like 16 signed the letter, but I would say half of those people were like sort of sold a false bill of goods. They didn't realize it was going to be used in a boardroom. A board of directors, remember, if there's a strike, let's say there's a union strike for a company, and there are strikes all the time at these companies, the board is usually adverse to the strike.
Yes.
You never see a board member organize a strike.
Exactly.
That never happens.
They were harvesting for this. They went out harvesting for these complaints. And you go to any company, especially one that's filled with young people, and I don't mean, I'm not, it's not I'm against young people, but people who haven't had the corners knocked off them. And I'd say this was the same back in the 90s too. I mean, if you have people in your 30s or 40s, then they're going to be different from people in their 20s. They're going to, they're just going to realize that, especially in a newsroom. This is not beanbag. This is tough. This is fun, by the way. I mean, I don't want to make it sound bad, but this is a fun environment too. But it's also a highly stressed environment. And you're going to, as you grow, and another thing about your newsroom actually, which is unusual, is because when I was in my 20s in Belfast, the great thing was you could get the front page of the newspaper every day, and your byline would be there, and you'd be interviewed on TV about your story if it was a good story, and you'd get on the radio. You're asking people to do all this hard work, and no one will ever know who they are.
Well, that is a very good point. As a point Rush Limbaugh made to me, most of my reporters working for me had no bylines.
Yes.
So, I got all the credit, but I also got the lion's share of the arrows. And a really interesting thing happened recently. I don't think it's appropriate for me to get into the specifics, but I'll give you the broad. It was like, then the question is, what's the plan? Like, who's the face? Because I was the face. and someone said, well, I don't want to be the face. And they say, why not? So because I don't want to get attacked. And I was like, exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone wants the power.
Yes.
And everyone wants the glory and the whatever you want to call it, the benefits of, and some of them are not really that beneficial. But nobody wants the responsibility of being the chief witness in dozens of lawsuits, raising tens of millions of dollars to pay for all the lawsuits. It's a lot of responsibility. So I would point you to this article, The Institutional Pathology that removed James O'Keefe and Veritas.
Where was that published?
Dr. Robert Malone, the guy who went on the Rogan podcast, wrote a whole Substack.
Yeah.
Read the Substack because that'll give you some insight.
Yeah. I was also disappointed to see the board, right? So look, liberal companies do this all the time. When you pay for an independent investigation, it's not independent. So you make allegations about someone, you publicize them, and then you pay a lawyer's company $500,000, $1 million. That's not an independent commission. That's a commission. That's not an independent investigation. That's a commission. They're commissioning a report to come to the conclusion they want them to come to. This is what liberals do when they want a virtue signal. Let's have an independent investigation into our roots of slavery, and then they find the company was involved in it, and they virtue signal. Look, when you hire these expensive lawyers, they know what the allegations are, so therefore they know what the investigations should find. They know who's paying them, and they know the results.
Well, it's also most investigations. You investigate and then you come up with a verdict or an outcome. Whereas in this case, you came up with a verdict and outcome, and then you launch an investigation.
Then you pay the investigators to come up with and say, "This is what happened. Please have an independent investigation that we're paying you for."
None of it made any actual sense, and I said that in my remarks. And I truly do mean this. That I know that we were in the weeds here, and that's fine. I'm happy to address it, but it's just like, I learned a lot of things. I never really paid much attention to board composition. I probably should have, and that's my fault. But I think I'll be a more effective messenger, a more effective leader. I learned more about human nature in 45 days than in all of my 18 years of doing this. So I view this as a very positive thing. I'll be more effective. But I mean, all the things coming at me at once, that you take the sandwiches from the pregnant ladies. You take the black cars. You're a tough boss. I definitely, that is true. I was a very demanding taskmaster and a perfectionist, and I'm running around 1,000,000 miles an hour. And it's I would say, as a leader, I'm hurried. I'm busy. Even as I sit here right now, every 30 seconds my phone rings, and some of these are really important people. And I have to say, I can't talk right now. I'm doing a lot of things, and I don't, and I never really asked you how your Thanksgiving was.
I know.
I never say, hey, how are the children doing?
How are the children doing?
You have 60 employees. And you could spend 3 hours a day asking everyone about their children. And does that make me a bad leader? I guess so.
When I was a young journalist, if my boss had come up and asked me how was my Thanksgiving, I would have just froze in absolute fear, because I would have thought he was going to fire me. Why on earth would my boss they're supposed to say, what stories have you got? What have you bringing to the table? And I was delighted to bring. No personal life, please, thank you. I grew up with the guy with a cigarette and a bottle of whiskey, a glass of whiskey. Guy, where's my story? Slightly, right?
I never. When I would go to work, people make small talk, and I just go right to it. I don't know. It's just something about me. I guess I have read stories about. Like General Mattis, the Marine general, he would take his phone off the receiver and sit back and listen. It's just the nature of who I am. Yeah. I'm running 100 miles an hour, and time is so precious and so limited when you're in a newsroom that I'm trying to get 1,000 things done in a day.
But also, by the way, you're the face of the organization. Like your name is on the not only in the masthead, it's on the story, it's on the Twitter account. You have to drill down that journalist and say, where did you get the story? What did you do? When were that? How did this happen? You're the one that's going to be in court named in the lawsuit. You're the one that's going to be facing the FBI coming through your door at 6 a.m. in the morning. So there's no time for niceties. You know, in fact, niceties are a distraction from the very serious matter of Project Veritas journalism. Sorry, that's the reality.
It's all about, with great power comes great
Yeah.
responsibility, and people just don't really think about responsibility. The other guy's responsible. The other guy's in charge of this. Oh, James was, and when there's no one that's responsible, when there's no leader, it's like, my old question was, what's your plan? Like, who's the person that is the leader? Every
Yeah.
team needs a quarterback. Every team needs a captain. And I, who's the person? Where does the buck stop?
Yeah. Yep.
It can't be a committee.
No.
Someone has to be in charge, and who is that person? So, again, I learned a lot about human nature, and I think I'll be more effective
Yeah.
as a result of this. You couldn't, no business school education, no MBA
No.
could have possibly taught me, and I just think. And by the way, one of the things I've learned is that, like Debbie Bernal, the Pfizer whistleblower, she was not willing to go public before this happened, and after this happened to me, then she went public. And there's so many more stories like that where people came to me, and because if you think about it, it's very on brand for me to get removed from the company I founded days after the Pfizer
Yes,
story.
yes.
It kind of just makes sense,
Tell me this now. So tell me, one thing that's worrying me about all this is, you had a strategy, and it was a great strategy, of fighting everything, fighting every lawsuit, and settling nothing, fighting to the Supreme Court, not metaphorically, literally. And I'm worrying that now, with you no longer the head of Project Veritas, they won't understand what that means, how important that is, and some of these cases will be settled, and people will be able to say this case was settled, as opposed to being fought tooth and nail.
First of all, I don't know if my strategy is sustainable. I think it was the right strategy, but the legal fees were eating up a very large portion of the budget, and it was. I'm not sure that it's possible to do that forever. Some things, even from my perspective, you just can't fight. You can't die on every single hill. There just isn't enough time or money. And if you've made a mistake, you have to admit it.
Yeah, no, listen,
Yeah.
but of course if you've made a mistake.
Made a mistake. If you haven't made a mistake, it goes back to this philosophy of, well, I'm out there in the black cars because I have to go to 7 meetings to raise all the money. But if you take that right of mine away, how are you going to pay for the lawsuits?
Well, yeah, I mean, this reminds me, Mark Stein was very good on this. Do you remember during the Trump administration, there was I think it was the Secretary of State for Defense, was accused of having the intern, walk his dog or go shopping or something. And Mark Stein made a very good point. Do you want the Secretary of State for Defense to leave the Situation Room to walk his dog? Do you want him to go shopping? Or is that not the role of the intern or the personal assistant to take all that away from him so that he can or she can devote all their energies to the important project? And if you're on the road all the time, if you're working 90 hours a week, why? And Project Veritas are happy with that. And as you say, you're the face of it, you're the talent, you're the CEO, you're the chief project officer. Then why didn't they come to you and say, look, let's get you a personal assistant on the Project Veritas tab so you can do and focus on what you do best and what is the most important thing for Project Veritas and the most important thing for the country? Do you think the donors would care if you had an assistant walk your dog? I don't even know if you have a dog. Do you think the donors would care? I think no, the donors would applaud that. But they didn't come and ask you to do that.
Well, I mean, many people have pointed out that the amount of money that I was raising, some have said I was underpaid.
I saw your salary today, and I thought, compared to some other not-for-profits I know, I believe you were underpaid.
I was trying to be selfless. Like, for example, I wrote 3 books and I donated all the proceeds to charity. I tried to do the right thing. I always will. I will still do the right thing. I felt that was the right thing to do because I was trying to be very careful and cautious and prudent. In other words, if I used any dime of nonprofit resources to help me with my book, which I did, I had some researchers, I had footnote assistants. And that American Muckraker was a heavy lift. It took
Yeah.
me 5 years. I have 700 footnotes in that book. 700. So I spent months just making sure all the footnotes are correct, and I used Veritas. I said, if I use $1 of Project Veritas money on this book, I will donate, because I don't want it to be complicated with the IRS. And it's kind of funny to say that the Project Veritas owns the rights to my own book right now. Okay, but don't brand me as selfish.
Yes.
If you're in sales and you're raising 20 million, you're going to be a multimillionaire. You're going to be making 5% or 10%
Yes.
of that money, and I was making even a fraction of that. So I tried to do the right thing. And
of course, you're going to fall short of that, by the way. And that's what this independent investigation is probably going to uncover. But people need to. Yeah, you're right. Like I think you were underpaid. I'm not sure that you should have donated your books to the Project Veritas.
Well, the people around me that I surrounded myself with. I mean, this is the problem. I mean, everything I said in my outgoing address, which is, there was a moment, I think it was February 3rd, where one of the officers said, we're gonna remove you as CEO. And the first thought that occurred to me, amongst many thoughts, you'd be shocked if you were being removed from is I thought, there's 100 things going through your head. And I said, the first thing is, what are we going to tell the people? Do you have a press release written? Are you going to issue a statement? What are you going to tell the donors?
Uh-huh.
And the response from this officer was, well, they don't really need to know.
You're kidding me.
Which was so crazy and bizarre of a statement. It was actually, it does. Well, none of it makes any sense.
No, I disagree. It makes perfect sense. In fact, that encapsulates everything. They didn't understand journalism.
Well, but forget.
They didn't understand the organization.
Journalism. If you're Pepsi-Cola, or if you're Exxon, or if you're anything, and you're going to remove the person, and you're going to tell your shareholders or your stakeholders, whatever, and it's either the timing it's really stupid because you don't do it days after the Pfizer story. Yeah. Or you're compromised. I have no evidence to suggest the latter. But what I asked is, what are you going to tell people? Mm-hmm. And this man responded, well, they don't really need to know that you're no longer. Yeah. Well, I said, well, but most of them want me to be the chief decision maker because they trust my judgment.
Yes.
So if I'm not the chief decision maker, who is the chief decision maker?
And I see Project Veritas are still releasing stories. You're correct, and I see Project Veritas are still releasing stories, but there's no name on those stories. There's no face on those stories. There's nobody standing over them except Project Veritas. So who is the face of Project Veritas? Which is another thing. Where does the buck stop with these new stories?
Don't know.
Yeah, and that's not... People like to know there's someone saying, this, I'm putting my credibility on the line. Look at this story. So what is OMG Group? I mean, is it a traditional journalism? Is it by commission? I mean, if the Republican Party came up and asked you to investigate something, would you do it?
It's just launched. It's a subscription-based news organization. We have about a dozen people right now, elite journalist team. And the mission, the vision is slightly evolved. It's now I want to empower other people to do journalism on their own. So rather than me having just my own little team, and the story that we're releasing as of this recording, I don't know when you're releasing this, but tomorrow I'm actually releasing a story, and this is the 27th of March, so this will be tomorrow the 28th, and it's going to be kind of a tutorial on how to go expose what in your community. And my vision is to have thousands of people doing this on their own. It's not going to be easy. There's recording laws. There's all types of ethical considerations, but I want to teach people how to do it themselves. So I decentralize journalism a bit. And that's the mission of O'Keefe Media Group.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like all the times we've met over the years. I remember you always said your biggest hope was that someone would start copying you. Someone would set up Project Veritas, that they would start copying what you're doing. That was your hope.
This was way back when I met you, and Andrew and I had the same thought, but I wasn't ready for it then. And I don't think I was ready for it 5 years ago or a year ago. I think now is the time, because when I'm on Twitter, everyone's like, what do I do? Thousands of people message me saying, hey, I'm ready to go. Give me one of those cameras. So now it's like putting them to work.
Yeah, but no organization has copied you. there's no other Project Veritas out there doing what Project Veritas did. I mean, and it's partly because the right don't do journalism. And they're very good at doing kind of journalism where, oh, look at the latest outrageous thing AOC said, or look what the New York Times has done. But original journalism, no one has done or is doing what Project Veritas was doing. They don't do original
They're
journalism.
very reactive.
Very reactive.
And if the so-called liberal media wasn't doing anything, they'd probably sit on their ass
That's right.
and with their hands under their ass and say slow news day.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to be the mover of events, to
That's
be
right.
the proximate cause behind things. No one wants to break news.
That's right.
Even on cable news, people just talk about news that other people
Yes,
break.
that's right.
So it goes back to the fear factor.
Yes.
And the commercial imperative.
It's hard work too. It's hard work.
Well, notwithstanding the hard work, you have to be willing to get flack for being over the target. Nobody wants that. There's no reason for it. You have to be a masochist to do this. And do you like pain? Do you like defamation? Do you like people around you?
Do you like getting things wrong? By the way, sometimes you get things wrong,
I made a couple mistakes. They're on the website there. Not very big ones either. I've been very careful in my life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Ashley Biden, I would argue almost that you were too cautious with the Ashley Biden.
Some people disagreed. They thought I should have ran that.
Yes,
I did not.
I don't know the background. I don't know I don't know exactly what you knew, right? But people publish stolen documents all the time. Every New York Times document from the government, it's stolen, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it didn't accidentally. Someone made a conscious decision to remove it. Julian Assange, these are stolen documents, and stolen is a these are documents taken by someone who knows they shouldn't take them and removed for the purpose of giving.
Journalists have a right to publish material stolen by somebody else, so long as the journalist played no part.
That's right. In the
that's
theft.
the language.
And I would argue that that's what happened to you with Ashley Biden, but I don't know the exact background. In the end, you decided not to run the story, and you handed the diary back, and your reward for that was the FBI raiding you at 6 a.m. This is tough work, right? Yeah. But also it shows the amount of ethical consideration.
Yeah, if I was a political operative that wanted to hurt Biden, I would have ran it without concern or mind for the circumstances. But first of all, I didn't know if that diary was it could have been a forgery.
Yes.
I mean, I was fairly certain it was real. But even if it was real, I wasn't certain that the things in the diary occurred, because she wrote some things in there, and the Biden children are deeply troubled, and the Hunters, troubled. They're both troubled. So and then there was this other,
Is Ashley's Hunter's sister? Is that right?
Yeah.
Funny.
Most people don't realize that Joe Biden has a daughter named Ashley. She thinks she's in her early 40s.
Yes.
So I didn't run the story, and people got angry at me, and maybe some thought that I should have ran it because they thought that I had a platform where someone else ran it, and But I try to do the right thing, and ethics is journalism ethics is usually situational. There's no hard and fast rule.
That's why newsrooms are so noisy, by the way, is because people are having real conversations about real ethics, right? And that's why journalism school is normally not a great place to learn journalism, because it's very real time. It's very situational, and there's no right answer. There are right answers, but
it depends upon the situation.
Yes.
And it sounds like immoral situational ethics, but it is, because you think about privacy. You think, well, for example, I would never record someone in the bedroom. I just don't think that's the public has a right to know. Like if some guy's cheating on his wife, I just don't think that's. But if he's using taxpayer dollars and he's a U.S. senator and he uses his expense account to book the hotel room, okay, maybe I would do that story. But just generally speaking, I would not record that. And there are lines, and there's this famous line from Ernest Hemingway, and I'm going to mess it up, but he says ethics is, what is moral is what you feel good after, and what is immoral is what you feel bad after. Well, that's a very, very generic way of viewing morality. But in journalism, it's like, it's not what is moral is what you feel good after or bad after. It's having done the thing, it's better than if you had never done it at all. So nothing that we do sometimes doesn't make you feel good, but the world is better off after you have done it. So you have to evaluate the situation. And in undercover work, nobody likes being covertly recorded.
Oh, it's terrible.
Nobody likes that. But the world is often better off because the public's right to know trumps all the other considerations, like you're harming the person. Listen, good journalism often harms people.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it is awful. And Anne and I, we've done stories, and we've thought this guy could kill himself, and you have to think about those things. I mean, you have.
You
to
do, and if you know that someone, I've done stories where I actually didn't run it. There's an example with a Facebook story I did because I knew the guy was suicidal, and blurring the face was not enough. I said I can't run it because the public's right to know is not as important as that man's life.
Yeah.
So people don't know these things.
No, they don't.
They don't know that I do care, and it's ultimately you can't be a total political hitman.
No.
You have to care about these issues.
So OMG, then, it's a media group. Are you? I mean, if let's just say the Republican Party came up to you and said, "We want you to investigate the new Acorn or whatever, and here's money." Would you be interested in that? Or is it by commission, or is it?
No, it's a subscription. So
Right.
whereas with a 501c3, you have donors.
Yes.
I simply have a subscribe button, so people that can put $200 or $20 a month or $500, and for $500 you can actually for $1,000 you can sponsor one of our cameras. So we white labeled special hidden cameras, and for $5,000 you could sponsor a few.
Very
for $10,000 you could sponsor more. So you're basically sponsoring cameras to be shipped out to citizens, and you're getting a subscription to the website. Now the website's brand new, but eventually there'll be a paywall. Eventually I'm going to put courses on the website
Very
in
good.
legal, technology, ethics.
So where can people find you? How do they get in touch with you?
O'Keefe Media Group, OKEEFE Mediagroup.com.
Okay, so O'KeefeMediaGroup.com. That's O'KeefeMediaGroup.com. Thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule. I think people can probably have heard your phone ringing a few times during this, more than a few times. But I think this conversation we've been having has been important. Journalism is important. It's inspiring. For me, it's always a surprise to me why more young people aren't into journalism because of how important it is, how much fun it is. I always say that I just can't believe more young people don't love journalism. It's a wonderful job.
Well, maybe they will. Maybe this is a beginning, a dawn of a new era.
Yeah. Okay. Hope so. This interview could have went on forever, but we have to call a halt to it. Thanks again, James.
Thank you.
See you again next week. Please leave your comments below. Tell us what you'd like to tell James, what message you'd like to pass on, and talk to you next week. Bye.